Lonely rancher bought a deaf girl, sold by her drunk father, then realized she could hear with heart asterisk. I never thought a single gunshot could shatter the fragile peace of a dying autumn day. But there it was, cracking through the dry air like thunder from a clear sky. Texas, 1881, the kind of year where the frontier still chewed men up and spat them out. And I, Jack Harlan, had learned that lesson harder than most. The livestock auction in Dust Creek was winding down, the sun baking the earth into cracked leather, when two outlaws decided their grudge over a stolen horse was worth dying for. Bullets flew wild, one grazing a corral post right beside me, splintering wood into my face like angry bees. Men scattered, horses reared in panic, and the air filled with the acrid bite of gunpowder. I ducked behind a water trough, my hand instinctively going to the Colt at my hip, heart pounding not from fear but from the raw memory of battles I'd fought and lost. Sheriff Harlan, no relation, thank God. Just a coincidence that made folks whisper about kin where there was none stepped into the fray like he owned the chaos. Enough, he bellowed, his badge glinting under that merciless sun. He fired once into the air, then leveled his shotgun at the bigger outlaw, a scar-faced brute named Red Callahan, who'd ridden with the Comancheros before turning to rustling. The other, a wiry kid, barely out of his teens, called Billy Quick, dropped his pistol first, blood trickling from a shoulder wound. "You boys want a noose or a cell?" The sheriff growled, his mustache twitching like it had a life of its own. Red spat a curse but holstered his iron, the fight draining out of him as deputies hauled them away. The crowd murmured, some laughing nervously, others shaking their heads at the foolishness of it all. Me, I just wiped the sweat from my brow and straightened my weathered hat, the sharp eyes beneath it scanning the corral for what I'd come for, a horse. Not trouble, but trouble has a way of finding a man, especially one like me, 36 years old, shaped by the relentless grind of ranch life and the ghosts that haunted it. I'd lost my wife, Sarah, 5 years back to a fever that swept through like a biblical plague, taking her and our unborn child in one cruel night. Since then, isolation had been my companion, the vast plains my only solace. I rarely came to town except for essentials, bullets, flour, and maybe a horse to replace the ones worn down by the land. Today, amid the post-shootout dust settling like a shroud, my gaze landed on a sorrel gelding in the far pen. He was gaunt, ribs sharp as knives under his scarred flanks, trembling like he'd seen too many whips and not enough kindness. Something in his wild eyes mirrored my own buried panther, kind that doesn't heal, just scabs over. That's when I saw her, tied to a drunken fool's wrist by a frayed rope, like she was no better than livestock. She couldn't have been more than 20, her auburn hair tangled and matted with sweat, her faded blue dress torn at the hem, bare feet caked in the red dirt that stained everything in these parts. She didn't cry or beg. She just stood there, eyes unfocused on the horizon, as if the world had already broken her spirit. The drunk, a pot-bellied wreck named Otis Granger, known around Dust Creek for his moonshine still and his temper swayed on his feet. Bottle in one hand, rope in the other. Got me a deaf and dumb one here. He hollered, his voice slurring like molasses in winter. Came from my late wife, God rest her worthless soul. Don't talk, don't hear a damn thing, but she'll scrub your floors and cook your beans without a peep of sass. Cheap, who'll give me 10 bits for her. The crowd, still buzzing from the gunfight, let out crude laughs. Old man Whitaker, the blacksmith with a face like cracked leather, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Hell, Otis, she looks half feral. You'd pay me to take her off your hands. A few others chuckled darkly, their eyes raking over her like she was a sideshow curiosity. One ranch hand, a burly fella named Hank from the double bar spread, nudged his buddy, deaf and dumb. Sounds like the perfect wife won't nag. Yea, none, they guffawed. But I felt a twist in my gut, something hot and angry bubbling up from the depths I'd buried deep. I'd seen enough cruelty in my day's Comanche raids. Cattle drives gone wrong, men hanging from cottonwoods for less than a stolen kiss. This was the frontier's ugly underbelly, where souls got bartered like hides. I turned away, focusing on the gelding, telling myself it wasn't my fight. I'd come for a horse, not to play savior. But then her gaze locked onto mine, steady, unblinking, those hazel eyes piercing through the chaos like a beam of light in a storm. No pleading, no desperation, just a raw, unspoken understanding that hit me like a gut punch. It was like looking into a mirror of my own loneliness, the kind that echoes in empty rooms and starless nights. Sarah's eyes had held that same depth once, before the fever stole her away. My chest tightened, memories flooding back, her laughter by the fire, her hand in mine under the quilts, the way she'd whisper dreams of a family we'd never have. Now, here was this girl, silent as a grave, pulling at threads I'd thought long severed. Otis stumbled closer, reeking of cheap whiskey and despair. You there, Harlan? I seen you eye-eyeing that sorrel. He's yours for a fair price, but the girl's part of the deal. Ain't dragging her back to my shack she, ain't worth the dust on her toes. He yanked the rope, and she winced, a flicker of pain crossing her face that made my blood boil. The crowd pressed in, sensing a spectacle. Hank jeered, "Buying trouble, Jack. Or starting yourself a little harem out on that lonesome spread." Laughter rippled, but I ignored it, my jaw clenching like a vice. This was a moral crossroads, the kind that defines a man. Walk away, and I'd be no better than them. Step in, and God knows what ghosts I'd stir. I hesitated, my hand hovering over my coin pouch. The gelding pawed the ground, snorting froth, his eyes pleading in their own way. But it was her gaze that sealed it the way it held mine, not begging, but recognizing something kindred in the wreckage of our souls. "I'll take both," I said, my voice low but steady, counting out sparse coins into Otis's greasy palm. Enough for the horse, a pittance for a life. The crowd erupted in mockery. Harlan's gone soft. Whitaker hooted. Next thing, he'll be preaching sermons. Otis yanked the rope one last time, but she recoiled, stepping instinctively behind me, her small frame seeking shelter in my shadow. It was her first act of choice, and it hit me like a revelation. Trust. Fragile as a newborn foal, I untied the rope with rough hands, tossing it back to Otis like trash. "She's free of you now," I muttered, leading the gelding out of the pen. She followed without a word, her steps soft and deliberate, like a deer navigating thorns. Sheriff Harlan caught my eye as we passed, tipping his hat with a knowing nod. "Careful, Jack. Frontier's full of strays that bite." I didn't reply, just loaded the horse onto the wagon hitch and motioned for her to climb in the back. She folded herself into a corner, pulling a thin shawl tight around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the distant hills. As I climbed to the driver's seat, I felt it a faint tug, her roughened fingers grazing my arm, calloused from God knows what hardships. It was barely a touch, but it sparked something electric, a whisper of vulnerability in the vast, unforgiving plains. My heart stuttered, memories of Sarah's gentle caresses flooding back, mixing with this new, unnamed pull. Who was she? What storms had carved her silence? The wagon creaked forward, wheels rattling over rugged trails baked hard by the sun. Neither of us looked back at Dust Creek, the horizon swallowing our pasts like a hungry beast. The ride home stretched long, the autumn wind whispering secrets through the mesquite, carrying scents of sage and distant rain. I glanced back once, seeing her curled there like a shadow, face turned to the breeze, auburn strands whipping wild. What had I done? Bought a horse and a mystery, invited the unknown into my solitary world. My ranch Harlan's hollow, folks called it was no paradise. A sturdy cabin with a slanted roof to shed the rains. A couple of barns weathered by storms. And endless grasslands where my cattle roamed under those big, indifferent skies. It was enough for a man like me, hardened by loss, but now it felt exposed, like opening a wound to the wind. We arrived as the sun dipped low, painting the prairie in golds and crimsons. I helped her down, my hand brushing hers, another spark, warm and unsettling. She alighted gracefully, her alert eyes scanning the land. Not with fear, but a watchful adaptation, like she'd learned to read the world's dangers long ago. Inside the cabin, the air was cool and musty, the hearth cold from my absence. Without a word, she moved to it, kindling the fire with practiced ease, then brewed coffee from the tin on the shelf. It was as if she belonged, her movements innate to hearth and hardship, filling the space with a quiet purpose I'd forgotten could exist. I watched, transfixed, as she poured a steaming cup and set it before me, her eyes meeting mine, briefly a silent offering that stirred something deep, a flicker of connection in my isolated heart. I handed her a piece of chalk from the mantel, tapping the rough wooden wall beside the table. "Name," I said slowly, not sure if she could read lips or understand at all. She looked at me, then crouched, scrawling in delicate script, "Amelia." I repeated it, the sound rolling off my tongue like a forgotten melody. "Amelia." She gave no smile, just turned away, but in that moment, the name lodged in my chest, a seed of curiosity blooming amid the thorns of my grief. Days blurred into a rhythm, her muteness a veil that hid depths I couldn't fathom. No sounds escaped her, no sighs, no hums yet. Her actions spoke volumes in our quiet routine. She'd rise before dawn, tending the chores with a grace that belied her youth, sweeping the porch, mending fences I'd neglected. One morning I found her in the barn, crouched beside the sorrel gelding. He'd been skittish since the auction, his wounds festering, bucking at anyone who approached. But Amelia, she soothed him with gentle strokes, her touch calming his wild spirit where seasoned hands had failed. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, wondering at her empathy. Was her deafness a lie, or did it hide senses sharper than mine? As she wrapped his leg in clean rags, the horse nuzzled her shoulder, and I felt a pang envy, perhaps, or the stirrings of admiration that tugged at my guarded heart. Chalk messages began appearing on the wall. "Hey low, storm brewing," practical wisdom, filling the silence like rain on parched soil. Our wordless companionship eased the ranch's loneliness, her presence a balm to wounds I'd ignored. I'd catch myself watching her, the way sunlight caught her auburn hair, or how she'd pause in the grass, palms open to the wind, as if listening to whispers I couldn't hear. It awakened feelings I'd buried with Sarah, a yearning for connection, for someone to share the quiet burdens of this life. But doubt crept in. Who was she really? A runaway? A victim of worse than Otis? The questions built, creating a tension that pulled me closer, even as I resisted.